return to the depart position. I'm sure you'll find using your new MCA Discovision system to be rewarding and enjoyable. I thank you for watching.
Hello, I'm Davis Lewis, and I hope I'm finally on air. It's one of those things with live streams, isn't it? You can never really predict if things are working. Is the audio switched on? Is the video coming back? And then, of course, I'm seeing everything on a delay. So this morning there were some encoder problems. I believe the bitrate wasn't set correctly. It's one of those things. It worked flawlessly, of course, last week when I did it the first time in 2019, and today we had a bit of a technical glitch there. So what I may do, what I may end up doing is just edit this together and re-upload it. Maybe if the quality isn't so good that YouTube is recording, I've always got a backup here at home. Or do I? Yes, I do. Okay, good. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. Hello, Marco from Germany. Hallo nach Deutschland. It has been secretly one of those plans of mine to actually make a German channel as like a secondary channel and do things in German, because I'm from Germany, and it would be good to put that language to good use. So I don't know. It's one of those things. It may be a lot of work, but it's one of those things that I've got at the back of my mind. I've got a lot of viewers in Germany, so let's make that perhaps happen in 2019. Julia's here with me. She's hacking away at the keyboard in case there's anything that needs to be said or anything that I can't keep an eye on the chat. That sometimes happens, so it's one of those things. Today we're going to build an indoor pool scene. I've rehearsed this yesterday, and I've come up with the scene something like this. There we go. That's the thumbnail you've seen, and this is the scene that we're going to build today, or something similar, or fairly close to what this looks like. So this is a product here that was from the DAZ 3D website, and I'm a member of the Platinum Club, like I suppose many of us are that do DAZ Studio stuff. And once every week they send out a free product, and that's nice. But sometimes I don't really know what to do with it. I get it, and then I'm thinking, well, yeah, I must do something with that in the future, and then I often forget. So when this live stream came up, I was thinking, well, maybe I can put that to good use and turn this into a nice scene, and this is the result. So one of the things that I dislike about products that you get sometimes is that you look at the promo images and they all look amazing, and you think, great, I'm going to load this product in, I'm going to do test render, and my render looks sad and bland, and it's one of those things. I wish the developers would make it easy, like Stonemason makes it very easy. He includes light presets, he includes camera presets, but not everybody does that. And so I thought, it's a nice idea to look at a scene like that, maybe a freebie scene, and see if we can turn it into a nice palatable image. So here's what I've done with it, just as a brief overview. Aside from putting the character dead center here, these lights on the walls here, and as well as in the back, we're going to see more of that. These are also lights. They are objects that are inside the scene, so they already exist, but they're not actually light objects. So they're defined as surfaces, but they're not turned into light objects. So we're going to make that happen and turn that into emitting surfaces, so that you can, that this contributes to the lighting in our scene. So I'll show you how that works. In addition, I've also added these underwater pool lights here. So they're not part of the scene. Those are simple parametric point lights that we can create with Iray. Or even with 3D Light. I believe this scene is available as a 3D Light layout as well as an Iray kind of surface preset. So we're going to use the Iray version, and I'm going to show you how this works. The principle is the same in 3D Light, of course. And other than that, there's also these things in the ceiling here. Those are also lights, and they're also defined in the scene, but they're not turned on. So we're going to make that happen. Then we're going to find our way to the perfect shot. Now that's also something that there's several approaches to this, but I find if the scene is relatively large and enclosed with a ceiling and all that, we can wander through the scene using keyboard and mouse navigation, much like we do in third-person shooter games. So I'll show you how to do that as well in DAZ Studio. And other than that, I'll show you, oh yes, there's a bit of front lighting that's coming in from here, and that is not done via HDRI. So I've switched the HDRI completely off in this scene. And I've done it with kind of a faux HDRI. So I've imagined the scene to be somewhere, as the name suggests, an indoor pool, and there is opposite. There's of course the view of Sydney Harbour and the Sydney Opera House, like it is in the movies. You know, it's always like that. And to make that happen, I've projected an image of the Sydney Harbour outdoor scene I found on the internet on a simple plane, and then I turned that plane into an emissive surface, so that kind of shines in there. And in this scene you can't actually see it. Opposite, there's windows through which you could see that. The only thing that you can see is this reflection here, this white big blob here, and that's a reflection of what happens in the window on the opposite side. Okay, and I believe I've also moved these chairs into position here. Those are all the things that I've done, and I think I will attempt to do that again. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Let me show you the product that I've used. This is it. This is the hotel indoor pool. That was the Platinum Club freebie this week, and this is what the promo images look like. So you can see that the developer has also switched on the lights here at the top, and they've also have some kind of an outdoor scene going here, and you know, that's one thing that I'll show you how to do that without resorting to a high resolution HDRI image. There we go. On the character, I believe is Monique 7. I'm using the Frilly Triangle Bikini. This is it. It's also available from DAZ, but I'm using it with my own texture pack that's available from Renderosity here. This is the Breakwater texture pack. So I found the textures that came with the bikini a little bit bland, so I've created my own, and that's available on Renderosity. And tell you what, if you support me on Patreon, if you sign up as a Patreon supporter, no matter what tier, you will get this thing for free. So there we go, good incentive for everyone to sign up there. And of course you get my eternal thanks in return, and it'll contribute to the quality of the output that I'm going to create. There's also a hair prop that I'm using, which is by the wonderful, oh yeah, this is not actually anything, sorry. This is the scene, of course, sorry, there we go. I'm also using a hair prop here by the wonderful Biscuits. Hello to Holland there, Biscuits 3D, if you're watching. Great to have you on board. This is the hair prop I'm going to be using. That's also available from Renderosity. It's the MILA hair, and it's amazing the amount of morphs that are in there. And I thought, you know, when women go to the pool, maybe they tie their hair back, but at the same time, the humidity and moisture kind of makes the hair frizzy. So you can do all that with this hair prop. I love it. It's absolutely amazing. That's it. Let's get started and switch into DAZ Studio 4.10. It's important to know that I'm using 4.10 still. 4.11 is a beta version that's kind of around the corner, and the main difference is that when you load a prop into DAZ Studio 4.10, then you will see that the surface properties of a prop are for 3D light, so they're set up for 3D light, so we have to convert them for use in Iray. And as of 4.11, and that's the only difference, is the kind of the main difference in 4.11, aside from many other little things as far as I could tell, is that when you bring in a prop in 4.11, it has the Iray properties on there automatically, so that's, you know, you don't have to convert that anymore. And since we're gonna have to do that, I thought I'd mention that. So I'm using 4.10 still, and there we go. Let's start by switching off my frame aspect ratio so that I have a good view into the scene. I'll do that up here. Actually, can I show you this? Yes, I can. Is that it? No, that's it. There we go. I can show you this up here. Whoops. In this little thing, just switch off the aspect frame, and then that thing will go away. Is that my correct button? Yes, perfect. But it also loads that. So wrong function keys there. Anyway, one of those things. It'll be ironed out as we go along in 2019. Let me head over to the Smart Content tab. And I believe the indoor pool was in environments. Yes, there we go. That's the indoor pool here. And if I double click on that, then I get it either as a complete scene for 3D light and for Iray, and I also get just the room here and there. So those are the things that don't have the kind of the lounges and the recliners in there. I'm going to load this one, indoor pool complete Iray. I'll take a second for DAZ Studio to think about it. And here we go. This is our scene. Now, first of all, navigating it, there's two kind of parts to the puzzle. This is what I'd like to do. So first of all, we have our regular scroll in and scroll out mouse wheel option, and we can maybe hold a function key and then spin around in the scene. But sometimes when the scenes are larger, I find that a little bit cumbersome to walk around in them. So if I wanted to go over here to that recliner, I'd have to go and do this, and maybe switch positions like that, and sometimes that's just a little bit time consuming. So what we can use there is this keyboard and mouse navigation, and there's an article on my website, and in fact a video from a couple of years ago that I've made in which I'm explaining exactly how that works. So in essence, we switched this little thing on here at the top, which is the keyboard navigation, so you can toggle that on or off. And there's also another thing which is just next to it, which is the scene navigator. So this can be just toggled on and off. If you switch that on, then the keyboard navigation becomes active, and that means with the A and D keys we can now strafe left and right in our scene. With W we can move forward, and with S we can move backwards. So that's very exciting to do that. We can then look around in the scene with the mouse, not currently, because if I click something then I select anything that's selectable in the scene. So for that I need to switch on this little thing here, which is the scene navigator tool. So that's again, that switches away from the 3D manipulator tool. So if I click that, then I can left click and drag to look around in my scene. And then if you're familiar with first-person or third-person shooter games, then you can do both these things at the same time. So you can literally walk around the scene, and I find that extremely exciting, because then that way you can literally go and get the accurate kind of camera angle that you're looking at. You can also move up and down. That's the Q key and the E key. That lets you move up and down. Look at that. That's what's going on underneath the pool. Very interesting there. So yes, that's how that works. So that's one thing, I thought I wanted to share with you, because sometimes it's nice to explore a camera angle just like that. Part 1 to the puzzle. Part 2 is that currently I'm using the perspective view, and that's kind of the more or less a director's camera. It's much like the front, left, right, back, and all these views here. It's the view that you can render, but if you really want to frame up a picture, you'd probably create a camera, and that's what we're going to do in a moment to frame up our shots. So what I like to do is use the perspective view to begin with and find my shot. Let's just say this is my shot, and then if I wanted to build an actual render from that, I would go and create a new camera, and with that new camera I'd copy the active view, which in my case is the perspective view, and then in my scene here, let me just close that down, I get one camera, and that's the one I can now select in this drop down, which is cool. And if I do that, then I can move the camera around. But then if I switch back to my perspective view, that's still as I left it. So the idea behind that is that if I go and look at something else to set it up, like set a character up on a prop or whatever, put two props together, I still have my shot kind of saved as I left it, because I don't want to touch that. Now I'm mentioning this because this is kind of part 2 to the puzzle of setting up a scene. One thing that I dislike about the perspective view, actually two things I dislike about the perspective view, is one is the focal length. I don't think it's very wide, so the shot I'm going to frame up later will have a wider focal length, so a shorter focal length and a wider kind of viewing angle. And I know of no way to change that in the perspective view. So what I tend to do is set up a camera that I'll just call the director's camera, and then I will do something with that. Let me just go and delete the camera that I've just shown you here as a demo, go back to my perspective view, and in fact create a new camera from that. So I'll go and create a new camera, apply the perspective view, and I'm going to call this one director's camera. And the advantage of doing it that way is that I now have a director's camera that I don't intend to render, I just intend to move around with it. But at the same time, check it out, I want to use this to have a wider field of view. So in order to do that, there's two ways to do that. Select your camera in the scene tab, and then either head over to the parameters tab, and under camera you've got some of these controls here. Or, because I tend to use the parameters tab for many other things. I have also set up my own camera tab here. You can set that up from, you know, window tabs and panes. That's where all these tabs are kind of hiding. And in here, in the camera tab, I have the same controls as in the parameters tab. So right now I'm going to go and reduce my focal length down to something along the lines of maybe 30, 28, something like that. It's not going to be the final thing. So yes, exactly, Marco. It looks like a first-person shooter game if you use a scene like that, which is really cool. I think that's something. I think they've introduced that in DAZ Studio 4.7, and I was very excited when that came out. So it really makes exploring large scenes just that much easier. Let's just say 35. That's kind of a nice wide-angle lens. So there we go. When we compare this view to the regular perspective view, or even to the one we had before, then I have to say there's just a lot more going. So now if I navigate, I can frame up much nicer shots. So I get a much better view of what I want my scene to look like. So I guess in our case we had it somewhere like this. Maybe a bit from the bottom here. And then of course you can always switch over into the other view if you want to, if you need to fine adjust the scene. But it's just good to kind of block the scene out and get kind of an accurate frame there. In addition, of course, you can use this aspect frame, and then you can see exactly what's going to be rendered on your scene. To switch all that off and go back into your regular thing, you can just switch over to the universal manipulator tool, and then you've got the selectability again, and then you've got the regular camera controls again. There we go. So that's one thing why I like using a dedicated director's camera like that. But the other is, notice what happens if I were to switch over to the perspective view and I'm looking at the scene maybe like this. There's this thing called the headlamp. I've talked about this many times before, but of course what happens is that it kind of depends on how the headlamp feature is set up. If I'm in render settings here and I go over to let me show you this over here. If I'm in my render settings, there is a way somewhere, I forgot where, of course, the auto headlamp feature here. I think it's under MISC, is that right? Yeah, there we go, under MISC. When there's no scene lights, use an auto headlamp. So this is kind of the default that DAZ Studio does there. But as soon as I create a parametric light, say like a spotlight, then just go and apply the default settings, the scene goes pitch black. And of course now I can't really set anything up. So it would be really, really helpful, DAZ, if we had an option to make sure the auto headlamp feature is either always on, never on, or when the scene lights are there. So it's basically a third option missing that says, please put the headlamp on at all times. And the perspective view, there's just no way to change that in the perspective view. But there is in a regular camera. So if I switch over back to my director's camera, then I currently have this is kind of the light that I've just dropped in. I've got the same effect as on the perspective view. So I've got a pitch black scene, and it makes framing things up extremely difficult. But I've also got there we go. These shortcuts, they kind of do something else. I meant to put the F keys up there so I can switch cameras easily without looking at another monitor. But, hey, one of those things. I hope you forgive me for looking over here every once in a while. So the thing in the camera tab is that under the headlamp option here, can you see that? Yes, you can. There's also an option to set this to auto, on or off. And this is kind of the third option I was talking about. Auto means when no scene lights are in the scene, use the headlamp. But if there is as much as one parametric light in the scene, then switch the headlamp off and give me a completely black picture, which was actually never helpful. So we can just switch that on here, and then we get a headlamp feature, despite parametric lights that haven't quite got the right values yet, because I'm still setting up the scene. So very helpful there. If that's why a dedicated camera is a great idea. So with all that out of the way, let's set up our shot with that dedicated camera. So those are the in summary, this is why I don't like using the perspective view that much. So our first line of duty, I guess, other than putting this, whoops, no, not that, there we go. Putting my, getting rid of my spotlight that I've just dropped in there for demonstration purposes. Let's make these things turn up in the actual render. To get a little preview there, what I'm going to do also is going to switch over my aux viewport. I'm going to put that to perhaps, right now I think I'll use my director's camera, or in fact let's go and create another camera from that, so that this is kind of our final shot that we're setting up. One of the two, I'm going to show you two, so I'm going to go a new, grab that from the director's camera, so this is going to be our camera one. So over here I'll switch over to camera one, and at the same time I'm also going to switch over here to the Iray preview, so that I have a little kind of scene there that shows me what this is going to look like just now without meddling with the lights. And perhaps it looks nice, perhaps it does not. Right now I can tell it's probably going to be a little bit too dark, I guess. And that's probably because we have a roof on this scene. So the IBL, that's probably set up. Let's just have a look under render settings, environment. Yes, there is a regular environment map is in here, which is why we see a little bit of something there. Let me go and that's the top right there. So get a bit of a better view. This is what the Iray preview looks like. So it's very dark, and that is probably because the pool ceiling is getting in the way. So if we switch that off here in our scene, then the IBL can shine right in, and that's what this looks like now. So this is kind of a outdoor daylight kind of setup there. But of course we don't really want that. We want to have proper light in there. So I don't know if I'm going to use the IBL at all. So I'll put the ceiling back on, and I'll leave it on for now. We can maybe tweak it later. It's nice to soften up shadows every once in a while. So, but right now let's look at these lights that are already prepared here in the scene. They're just not activated yet. So let's make that happen. If we select just one of them, can I select them? Yes, there we go. There's pool indoor lights. That's them, just switching them off. They're there in groups. In order to turn them into lights, we need to have a look at the surfaces tab. So with one of them selected, we head over to surfaces, and we can see that this object is actually made up of several surface types. So one is the bulb and one is the chrome. And the chrome is the silver bit that we can see. Perhaps with my director's camera, I'll switch that over to camera one. Perfect. We can go and frame that light up so we can see it a little bit better here. The chrome is probably going to be the outside bit, so this bit and that bit and the other bits around the corner there. But there's also a thing that's called the bulb, and that's probably somewhere behind that, and that's kind of cool. Yeah, look at the white bits here. That's the bulb, and that's the surface we'd like to change. So let's expand that, and this is already set up for the Iray material, of course. In the emissions tab, we can see that this is set to white, but it's not quite glowing yet, or not quite glowing strong enough. So what we can do here is change the luminance units from candles per square meters, I guess, into watts. That's something more kind of understandable for humans, and you can already see that they are starting to glow a little bit, just not reasonably well to provide good lighting in our scene. So to really illuminate the wall, perhaps we're going to try something like 100, a value of 100, and then we'll see what that looks like. It's getting there, it's getting there. Let's make it 200. We can also switch our large scene over to Iray. There's currently not much in it, so it'll take a moment for the computer to do its thing there, but we should get a more accurate preview. And there we go. This is how much the lighting already contributes to the scene. So that's very nice. So a value of 200, I guess, is a good starting point. But do experiment around with it. You can go high as up as about 100,000, something like that. It really depends on the scene. Don't be afraid to experiment with these values in extremes. And one of those things I found very helpful is to literally switch this to watts. If ever you're dealing with the surfaces tab and the emissions channel, change that to watts. That you can create the same effect with any of the other things, like, you know, candles per square meter, but that value would have to be a lot larger. So it's much easier to to type in a lower value and use a different luminance unit, basically. So that's neat, but if we zoom out of this computer, hello, oh, not that much perhaps. If we zoom out of this, let me just switch this back to the texture shaded viewport, because that's just it's just a bit easier on my computer resources here. We can see that the rest of those lights aren't set up yet. So we can see that on the left hand side of the wall here, there's still dark, and there's these lights in the background of the little back room here. They're still switched off. The good thing is we can literally just copy the values of the surface into those things without having to set them up again. And in order to do that, you head over to that emissions channel and just say copy selected surfaces. With that value in memory, just head over to other lights, for example the ones that we see here in the background. Don't know if I can select them through the wall. No, probably not. Let's open this door here. If you select that door on the parameters tab, I believe, yeah, we got an open close thing here going. That's perfect. Let's open that door as well. That makes it a little bit more look more inviting there. So now with those out of the way, I should be able to select those lights, and yes, indeed I can. And back on the Surfaces tab, I can now go and literally select that bulb channel, the whole bulb channel, and just paste my value right in there. And that will have copied the same value. You can just see that here in the preview into those lights as well. Let me repeat that process for these lights. You can also have a look at the scene tab here. Of course, there's more lights where that is applicable, and you can just go and select the bulb surface and paste those values right in there. So now I've got the back room lit up, and I believe there's more lights that we can't even see here. That's those lights. Perfect. Let's do the same here. It's just a matter of going through the scene and seeing where the developer has put other lights. Yeah, we've got those already. That's perfect. Have we got those on the side here? And no last one, I think we're missing those still. Emissions channel, there we go. Let's go and paste that in there too. And now we should have some light on the outside here. So that's just to illuminate the wall. We can use the same feature, by the way, to use these lights at the ceiling here. In fact, let me switch that back over to Iray view. I keep doing that. I mean, without Iray, it's much easier to navigate the scene. So and I'm using, I believe, this graphics card as an encoder for the video, so that makes it all a little bit, cramped on resources here. Is one of those things. Yeah, I do switch around there. Usually in pre-recorded videos, I can edit these bits out where things keep rendering, but on a live stream, that's not exactly possible. So we can use the same setup that we've got here. Let's select the indoor pool ceiling that has different materials. So the beams, the bulb, the ceiling, and the light. So I believe the bulb will be, again, that little white bit in the middle there, and that's exactly the one that we're going to paste our values in. And with that in place now, our ceiling lights should produce a nice lighting effect. Let's give my computer a moment to render there. And there we go, perfect. So that makes the room a little bit brighter, and of course it makes the scene look a lot more interesting that way as well. But we're far from over, we're far from done yet. So one other thing I want to warn you about: the more lights there are, or the more light emissive surfaces there are, the more taxing it is on the resources of your computer. So if you find that your scene is relatively simple like this, and you already find that the computer is kind of getting really, really slow, then that's probably the reason for it, because more lights mean more paths need to be, more rays need to be calculated, and the more realistic the image is going to look, but at the same time it's also going to be very difficult on your computer. Just saying that. Let's have a look. If I just switch this back over to, in fact, smooth shade it, that's a good idea. Let's place those lights in the pool like I suggested here. To make navigation a bit quicker, I'm going to switch this over to texture shaded here, my little viewport, so that I have my computer's full attention. So the way our character is going to sit there, I think maybe 3 or 4 pool lights are going to be in order somewhere along the lines of here underneath the water surface. It makes it look really nice later. In order to place them, let's go and go down here somewhere like that and see how we can do that. So I think what we can use here is parametric lights, parametric point lights. We get them into our scene by heading over to create new point light. And the difference between a distant light, spotlight, and a point light is basically that a distant light doesn't have a location. It's basically parallel light, and it doesn't matter where in the scene you move it, it'll always shine from everywhere into one direction, but basically from everywhere into the scene. A spotlight is shining from one point, but it only emanates in one particular direction, so it can't shine into all directions, whereas a point light is basically a light sphere that goes and emanates light everywhere. So it emulates light bulb, basically. That's what it is, yeah, like a ball that glows into all directions. We can change that as well through the geometry that we'll see how that works. So right now we're going to use a point light, and we're going to say just use the default settings, and I'm going to call this one pool light. There. It's not often that obvious as to where these things are placed. If you can't find it, just select it in the scene. In the scene tab, here it is, and then just use this little square button. If you do that, then your scene is going to focus right in on whatever object you've got selected. Also works with multiple objects. If you basically select the whole pool interior and I click this little button, then I see the whole scene from the outside. That's a very handy way to navigate larger scenes. So going back to my point light, I'll select it and I'll go and click that little thing, and then I've got it right dead center, where kind of close to where I want it. Not exactly where I want it though. So we need to move that over here towards the pool wall, and of course underneath the water surface. So the water surface is this gray little thing here. This is the kind of the water surface here, and we want to move that to about kind of halfway, or kind of a third into the pool. I guess that's what these lights are usually placed at. And let's start with one at this end here. Let's look at it from the side. So I want this to be kind of not behind the wall, but also not on the wall. So just like a little bit further up there. We don't have to build geometry for this. This is all, you could do that, but since this is such a small little asset, point light will work just fine. I'll put that right here behind the pool ladder. So we can just about see that at the bottom right of our final scene here. Now let's make sure we set this up correctly. Actually, let's move it here so we can see it better. There, I'm envisioning kind of 4 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Let's leave it here for now, and let's have a look at the light properties. This is not a mesh light, so we can find the parameters for this light on the parameters tab. With it selected here, my pool wants to open up all the time. So with the pool light selected, you head over to the parameters tab, and then you see the light tab. Here, let me make that a bit bigger so we can all follow along here. Under these are just the transformation values here, and under light, you'll find a few interesting options here. Let's break those out into, first of all, the area. The light geometry is currently set to point. I think I'm going to leave it. You could also use a sphere. Actually, maybe I will use a sphere. Let me use a sphere instead of a point. A sphere, the difference between a point and a sphere is that a sphere is, of course, larger than a point. A point is literally just one pixel and one vertex, shall I say. And a sphere is kind of larger. And we can set the height and width with these parameters here. Well, we've looked at that in previous tutorials. I think 10 is probably going to be a good starting point. Render emitter is also a good idea in this case, so I'm going to leave that as it is for now. Under photometrics, we need to set a few things. One of them is the luminous flux. That's the value of how much this thing glows. And then there's another thing, I'm going to show you that in a minute, how to change the color of the light. So let's switch this over, maybe the large bit over to look at the light here and see what it looks like without us doing anything. Well, I can barely see it. I can literally barely see it. Let me zoom in there and just see what that effect, oops, that was a bit much, what that effect may look like. So I can see something. I do now actually see the headlamp of my camera bouncing off against the wall, and off against the water. So that's not exactly what I want. So I may have to go over and select my camera quickly and switch that headlamp off. There we go. That makes it all. That makes that big white bit go away. Oh, that was a different, wrong camera there. Sorry. There we go. Perfect. So now all we get is the IBL and our underwater light. So that value isn't actually that bad. I think I like it a little bit brighter so that it lights up the pool a little bit better there. So let's go and make that happen with perhaps a slightly larger value. So let's try. It's currently 1500. This is where the really large values come in. So I suppose maybe let's try 5000 and see what that looks like. I'm starting to see a little bit of a glow on the outside here, but that's not really enough. So let me try 10,000. With these things, you really have to test it out and see. Well, look at that. This is the effect that I'm looking for. That the surface of the water is being illuminated from underneath. This is kind of the realms of this is starting to look nice. Because that's exactly like in reality. That's what makes pools at night look nice. That there's sufficient lighting involved there. 10,000. Let me try 20,000. That may be the value we're going to settle on there. 20,000. Hasn't made much of a difference. Perhaps I'll settle for 10,000. Also, the position of the light itself is another thing. You can move it forward a little bit, so then we illuminate the back wall a little bit more there. It really depends. I think I liked it before, and I'm going to go back to 10,000. It's one of those trial and error things which cost so much time in building these scenes. Speaking of time, how am I doing for time? Oh, look at that. We've been on air for 45 minutes already. We're nowhere near the scene being completed. So let's hurry it up a little bit. So a white light underneath the water doesn't look as effective as a blue light underneath the water. Let's try and work on that. There is on the top tab here under light, you can see that we have a color that we can change that into, and that is in fact the color of the light. So we can change that to anything. Change that to red, which looks probably rather scary, I'd say. Yep, there we go. It's almost like somebody's been bleeding in the pool, been murdered in the pool. We don't like that. Let's switch it to something like blue. Just a word of warning that when people use colors in something like lighting or in things like textures or for demonstration purposes, many people always go for the full whack values, like the 255 times 3 values, like the highest color value you can get. That often looks very unnatural because we really never, in reality, we never really see things like 100% blue or 100% red. That doesn't really happen that way. So this is one of those blues I'm talking about. This is literally 255 saturation value. That is just too much. So if I were to do that, then we get an effect like this, and that's not a little bit blue. That's kind of scary blue. So that's not really the kind of cozy nighttime pool atmosphere we're looking for. So let's make sure we turn the saturation down there. I think I'll settle for this preset value here on the Windows palette, and we'll see what that's like. It still has a 255 in there. I don't think I like that either. Perhaps something like this. That's also still got a 255 saturation. So something along those lines. I'm not entirely happy with how that's how that's coming out here. Perhaps I'll just use this and then go and turn that down manually to something like this. Yeah, that's better. So we give it a little tinge of blue, but you know, we don't overdo it at the same time. So that by itself doesn't look like much just yet. So let's go back into the texture shaded view, and if we're happy with that effect, also on my director's camera here, let's quickly switch that headlamp back on so that we can see what else we're doing here. With that pool light selected, let me just duplicate that along the way. Let's start by placing the first light somewhere here where I had intended it. You can worry about the height a little bit later there. And now I can go and say edit, duplicate nodes, and that will over here create a second pool light, which let's select that and move it over here. Yeah, so let's space them out. We can always do a more accurate placing later. Pool light 2, let's go and edit, duplicate that node again, select it and move it over here. And I suppose we'll put 1/4 one somewhere further at the back there. So edit, duplicate, and of course duplicating these things means that all my light values are also being duplicated. This is how 3D modelers work. They build one chair and then they duplicate them 10 times, and you've got a cafe scene. It's, you know, that's the magic of computer graphics, I guess. So we've got those set up here. Depending on, I guess our character is going to be here. We'll see where that light, what that light looks like later. We'll worry about that in a minute. But for now, we've got our pool lights set up there. In fact, let's switch this over to Iray so that we get a bit of a preview of what this already looks like. So with that in place, I think all we need now is something that'll brighten up the room just a little bit more, because right now, if I use my director's camera and I just spin that around, we see these windows on the other side here. And that is, of course, where with a bit of trickery, we could place a nice outdoor scene in there. And we can use that outdoor scene to contribute to the lighting. So one way of doing that would just be to draw the dome. That is one possibility. Let me switch that over here and render this in Iray without anything. All we get is the, so in fact, switch a large scene over here. There, and we get a bit of like a bigger view of what that would look like. So right now we see, of course, the effects of my headlamp that brightens up the room. So please ignore that. But at the same time, we're also seeing these gray patches on the back here, and that is something that would normally be rendered transparent. But if we were to place something else out there, we would see that. So either a backdrop would look fine, or if you want to replace that in Photoshop, that's also a good idea. But one other thing we can do, one simple thing we can do, is that under the render settings tab, we can, under environment, we can simply go and draw the dome. That's set to off by default. As soon as we switch that on, we get to see the light dome on the outside. So anything that was gray a moment ago will not show up as transparent in the final render. It'll now be filled. It's now going to be picture content. But what DAZ Studio is showing us there is literally the environment map. So if you have a proper HDRI in your scene, not the default, that's like 500 by 500 pixels large, that's kind of good for basic illumination, but we only see like a creamy mishmash of nothingness really, and that is probably something along the lines of these mountains that we see here, but they're so out of focus that we can't really see that. If you have a really high resolution HDR image on the outside, then that is a portion of that image that you could see through that. It usually doesn't matter because it's supposed to be kind of out of focus in the background, but if you want something in focus or in focus-ish, and you can't find a HDRI that will do the trick both for lighting and for good looks, then you can do you can simply use a plane or something similar, just an object on the outside there. Let me show you how that works. So right now I will no longer draw the dome. I will switch that off again, and go back to the gray stuff here. And I'm going to go and switch this back into texture shaded mode. Over here, maybe I will turn this into my second camera so that we have a locked off point of this view just for demo purposes. Let's create a new camera, duplicate the director's camera, and now we've got that here. Meanwhile, with my director's camera and the whole indoor pool selected, let's go outside a little bit and have a look at where these windows are. So this is where they are. And in order for something to appear through those windows, let's switch this over to camera 2 so that we can see what's going on here. We can place an object literally in front of them. And I'm suggesting we're using a simple plane. So let's bring one in. Under create, new primitive, let's create a plane. Size doesn't matter that much. Divisions also doesn't really matter. We just want this to be kind of a cardboard box thing that will show an image on there that we can look at through the pictures. So let's just leave it at 5 meters, and it comes in at the dead center there of the scene. So let's go and grab this little white triangle, not the whole thing, of course, just the in fact, let me just make that whole pool scene unselectable, because right now if I were to click on this I could move the whole pool, and that is really not what I want to do, like I did by accident. I don't want to move the walls accidentally here. I really don't want to do that. So let me click on that pool, and you see that little arrow here with a tick box next to it. If I click that once, then it has a little X there, and what that does, it makes the whole scene and any children in that hierarchy unselectable. So even if I click on the pool, nothing will be selected, which is very cool. So now all I can select really is my plane, and my lights. In fact, if I can make them out, I can't, so I'm going to select them from the scene tab here and just move it over here. It's one of those nice little workflow issues that I need to remind myself of that fact, because sometimes there's so many objects in the scene and you want to make sure I've just placed that. I really don't want to move that, and this is how you can make that happen. So with our plane moving out here a little bit, let's move it kind of at a 45-degree angle to the window. Let's turn it up a little bit. On the parameters tab, I can have more accurate values. So X rotate, I believe that's -90, and then we'll just move that over here. And then I believe the Z rotate is probably something along the lines of 45. I was not correct. It is probably the something else rotate. Is the X rotate, isn't it? Yeah, there we go. I know, and that's the Z rotate. No, it's not the Z rotate, it's a Y rotate. No, it's not. How interesting. Well, let's put that back to 0, and what I would like to do is, there we go, I like to do this, that's it, and then I like to do that. There. It doesn't have to be accurate. It's it's just for show on the outside there. Also, the image I'm going to use, I can maybe show you this. The image I'm going to use is somewhere here. Yeah, there we go. That's it. The Sydney Harbour image. So I found that on the internet. I think it looks quite nice, and I'm thinking, well, this is something that could be on the opposite side of our pool. So I thought I'll grab that for testing, because it's you can see the lights are on. So it's something that's kind of an afternoon evening scene here. Maybe it's a little bit too bright, but it's just for demo purposes, and you get the picture. So I can make that image show up on my plane, and we can already see that the aspect ratio of the image I've shown you there and my square plane, that doesn't match. So let's stretch this out a little bit, depending on how well the image fits on there. So I may have to redo all this, but hey, it's all part of the fun, isn't it? So with the plane selected, let's head over to the Surfaces tab, go to the plane, and first of all we see that these values and that's what I was talking about earlier, these values are now set up for the 3D Light render engine. So this is not suitable for Iray. It'll work, but because we're working in Iray, I would like to have the Iray properties showing up there. And one way to do that, in fact, let me zoom in there. Next week, my shortcut keys will work better, so you know, I can switch better from you know, zooming into the top left or top right corner there. So right now, in order to switch this over with the plane selected, we head over to the presets tab here under the surfaces tab, head over to shaders, and under Iray, the first thing we see in this list is the exclamation mark Iray Uber Base. And if you double click that, nothing appears to happen at first, but if we go back to the editor, we can now see that these values have changed. So those are now, the surfaces have now been translated into Iray surfaces. So now I can set the Iray properties, which I couldn't do before. For example, the emissions shader, the emissions channel that wasn't there before. So before that, I couldn't have turned this into an emissive object. Now I can, which is kind of nice. So under base, we've got two things here. We've got the base color, and we have got, so the base color, that's kind of the color of this object. And I think it's the wrong way around. So if I set this to something else like green, then this object will now look green. I think I've got that the wrong way around, but that's okay. We can turn that around in a moment. So let's look at this thing first. But rather than just putting a color on there, I can also put an image on here with that little triangle. So let's go over and browse to my Sydney Harbour image and place that on. Then sadly, it's not only the wrong way around, it's also upside down. Sorry, one of those things. Let's turn it around. Whoops. Hello, what's going on here? Okay, let's use the parameters tab instead of that. There we go. I suppose that'll be 90 then. No, it's not 90. How interesting. Well, let's make it parallel with the rest of the world. And at the same time, let's also rotate it around like this so that we can, no, it is dual-sided anyway. That's good for us. Good for us. So there, you get the picture. You line it up so that it looks palatable and stands in front of our scene. I guess that's what I'm trying to show you here so clumsily. You may have to increase the size. Yeah, actually this is still mirrored, isn't it? So let's turn it around. This is actually what it looks like there in Sydney, I believe. I've never been myself. And you can always use this final image as a guide to placing the picture and making it look well, the way you want it really. So fill the whole picture up here and adjust to your heart's content. If it would be a more suitable picture with an even wider shot of it, then I guess it would look better. And this is kind of why I decided not to use this shot. But I thought the information in here is nevertheless kind of valuable. How you can use your own images as outdoor images, and just line it up until it fits there, something like that. Play with the angle a little bit, and there we go. That's kind of, if we switch over to the camera 2 here, that would represent an outdoor view of that scene. Not perfect, I know, but you know, it's one of those things.
Full screen. Full screen.
Oh, I'm not full screen. Thank you so much. One of those things. Julia is helping me out here. She's watching the stream, which is very nice. Thank you very much for liking my channel, Nakomi. That's awesome. That's always glad to hear that. Thank you so much. And 3D Light Gamer Dude, I will cover that as well. It's one of those things that's kind of been more or less forgotten. It's still a very good rendering engine. So thank you for the feedback there. Maybe I will do that next week. Let's cover something similar for 3D Light next week. Good idea. So let's finish this off. This is how you can create an outdoor image. You can now go ahead and head back to the surfaces channel, play with the emissions channel and crank that up. If you set that to something other than black over here, set it to white, you'll see that some other options are coming up. And once again, you can set the luminance units to watt and then crank that up so that the outside image gets brighter and projects into your scene. So let's say 2000 watts, for example, and that'll be yet another light source that kind of projects into your scene. We'll see if we see something like that reflection on the door. Let me just quickly put, before we go any longer, let me just go and go back to our first shot here. Well, actually, that's the dark one. Let's go the director's camera again, and let's move inside our pool again. And let's place a character in our scene. I'm going to have a look at my camera 1 here. I'm also going to select my camera 1 and switch on that headlamp again, so that while we're setting this up, we can see a character. We're going to place the character, put some clothing on it, put the pose on it, and then we'll have perhaps one spotlight illuminating her a little bit better in this scene. And then we'll tweak the final lighting, and we should be finished. That's the plan anyway. So let's try this out. I'll go back into the smooth shaded view to save even more resources. Go back to the smart content view, and let's pick a figure here. I believe yesterday I've used Monique. Let's use Monique again. There's Monique 8 and there's Monique 7. I don't have that much content for the Genesis 8 series, so I'm going to use the Genesis 7 series instead. It's one of those things. Clothing does fit, but you know, it's always, I like using native figures there. I don't even know where my figure is. There she is. There we go. There she is. With her selected in the scene, let's go and put the frilly triangle bikini on. That's under wardrobe, and actually that's not an item of clothing for that figure. That's why it's not showing up in my smart content tab. I've got another video coming up this weekend about how to use content. That's part of the DAZ Studio 101 series. So that's all about the differences between the smart content and the content library, and I'm going to explain more about that there. For now, I'll just switch this off, and I get a lot more clothing items here on the left hand side. I'm going to go and put that bikini top on. And I'm getting this this dialogue again that this was unsupported. It used to be for Genesis 2 female. That's all I need to select really. And still with Monique selected, I'm going to go and put the bikini bottoms on. And again, that was for Genesis 2 female. Autofit doing a nice job there, perfect. And perhaps with her still selected, let's add a pose. Now the pose is from the wonderful Danny and Marfono, available from Renderosity, and that's part of the White Spring collection. That's why it's not showing up in the Smart Content tab, so I'll head over to the Content Library, and here's Biscuits MILA hair. I'm going to put that on last because hair is usually very intense, so let's not worry about hair for now. Let's go over to Pose, and no, actually the poses are in the DAZ Studio format. There we go. So I've got this set up here, and under People, Genesis 3 female, and there's Poses, and there's DM, and there's the White Spring collection #1. And I found a nice pose there that makes the character sit down. Now poses, we're going to delve into that in yet another video, but for now you can see that in this case we have two poses. One is centered and one is already putting the character into a different position. Let me show if I can show you that difference here. Double click the first one and the character will stay in place and just put on the pose there. But if I were to have selected the second one, I hope I can show you this, the character moves, and in this case moves out of frame. Now some poses are designed like that because they're part of a set, so they are valuable. But in that, sometimes you really don't want that to happen, and you apply a pose to a character and this character just goes boom out, and you go, well, that's not where I want the character to be. What am I going to do now? And there is a way that that you can apply a pose and keep the character in the position that he or she was once in there. So if I just undo that, and she's here now, and in fact if I just undo that again, she should turn back to a standing position. If we go to that pose, whoops, very sensitive mouse wheel I've got going here. If I double click that pose, the character moves away. But if I hold down the control key and double click that pose, then I get this little dialogue here, and that's kind of funky because now I can say, hey, actually I don't want you to transform in the X, Y, or Z direction, and I don't want you to scale anything. I still want you to probably to rotate things, but if you untick the translation items here and you hit accept, then the character stays in that position. So it's a very clever tip. If ever you have poses that really ruin your day and ruin your scene, hey, this is how you can probably salvage them, and just tell DAZ Studio, you know what, I don't want the character to move anywhere else. Just a tip from me. I'm going to apply the centered pose here, and now I'm going to move the character in position somewhere over here, I guess. Somewhere further down. This is partly why I like the smooth shaded viewport, because it means the computer's resources are really not being taxed so much. It's a nice way of just eliminating textures from the whole thing. In this case, it doesn't make that much of a difference, but it's a good habit to get into as you have more complex scenes with lots of textures. They can really suck your computer dry. So I want her body to touch and kind of go into the set a little bit. There's one thing I think that should really be like, this is the character poking through the set now. That's exactly what I want. There's something I'm really looking forward to, if ever that comes to DAZ Studio, and that is the deformability, casual deformability of characters. You know, somebody puts pants on and they should really dig into the body, deform the body, and that's currently not happening. Or a character sits down on here, the body should kind of squish out a little bit, and that's not happening right now. And that would be nice if we could at one point make that happen. So something along those lines. That sounds good. Let's have a look at our final shot here on camera 1 and just make that zoom in there a little bit more. I've been debating whether it is a good idea to include the pool ladder on the back or not, and I've decided to put it in because it does actually look quite nice. Without it, it's almost as if there's something missing from that picture. There. Speaking of missing things, I've also decided in the final shot that there was something missing here. So I've used some of the pool recliners from the other side that are by the window and moved them over here. So I'll do that in a moment. For now, let's finish the character off by putting on an expression. So I had imagined she's away in a hotel, boyfriend, husband is doing a kind of a conference thing, and she's bored and he's coming home late because conference or exhibition was taking much longer. So that's why I thought I'm going to put a bored expression on that. Expressions are found in the character's head, so select that either from the scene tab or just select the head. Then head over to the parameters tab. Under pose controls, you'll see the head, and there's some expressions if they're installed. I've got quite a few here for Genesis 3, and one was bored. There we go. So let's put a bored expression on her. And also, I don't think I want her to look at the camera. I'd like her to kind of gaze out into the Sydney Harbour there, something like that. So just move the character's head over. So that's that. One other thing, if I switch over back to the texture shaded views, I'd like to use my own textures that you get. I did mention this before, I thought I'd mention this again. If you support me on Patreon, you get access to a texture pack that's called Breakwater Textures for this particular bikini, for the frilly triangle bikini. And that is available, I believe, under people. Oh, that's under here, isn't it? Genesis 2, clothing, frilly triangle bikini. Under materials, you see all these wonderful breakwater textures that Julia and I have made together. So they're very attractive. There's a lot of funky options here. So on the top we'll maybe put the red one, and on the bottom we'll also put the red one. There are in total, I believe, 14 designs. So, you know, that's not bad, and you get it all for free along other funky goodies. So, you know, if you decide to do that, the link is patreon.com/VersLewis. I would be thrilled to see you there. And you get kind of behind the scenes material and other goodies if you wish. So, you know, definitely worth checking out. So that's that. To finish off the character, let's add some hair. And I've talked about hair earlier. It's a bit resource hungry, but let's do it nonetheless. Otherwise, that's just not going to look. Characters without hair just don't look very real, do they? So in my case, I'm going to use Biscuits MILA hair, and that's a poser format hair that I've got under props, I believe. Usually you'd look under hair, but Biscuits is very nice. If you do that and you go into the MILA hair, then you see, oh, hair is in the prop folder. There we go. So that's very helpful. I like that. Thank you, Biscuits, for doing that. So in our case, MILA hair comes with two versions here. One is the hair cap. So select Monique and double click the cap. That'll put it on there. And before we carry on with the cap selected, let's go, and under the morph tab you can see the G3 G8 fit that we need to dial that up so that that's kind of a base plate for the hair. And once again, with Monique selected in the content library, now we can go and apply the hair. Takes a moment for that to happen. There's a lot of morphs in that, and now we can see that the hair is on here, but it doesn't quite fit properly yet. So once again, select the hair, head over to the parameters tab and go into the morphs tab, into the fits tab, and then you see the same G3 G8 fit here, and that makes the hair prop fit properly on multiple characters. So you can see Biscuits has included fits for Genesis 2, Genesis 3, Genesis 8, Dawn, Pauline, and Project Evolution. So very exciting stuff. Not to mention the amount of offset and style morphs, the styles, how you can style the bun. This is so much work has gone into this. So, you know, very exciting there. I'm going to make that hair a little bit frizzy on the back, because that's what happens when you go into humid things. Oh, that's a bit too frizzy, so let's not go overboard here. But, you know, let's make it a little bit frizzy here. There we go. And one other thing that Biscuits recommends, once you've selected the hair, to make it look better, you can apply a subdivision surface morph. And that's just something Biscuits will tell you all about that in her product. So that's under Object, Geometry, Convert to Sub D. And subdivision surfaces, that is something that implies more polygons that are actually there, but that happens not in the actual geometry, but the moment it is being rendered or displayed in the scene. So that's the concept there, is that you can have a fairly low polygon thing, like say it's a square which only has 4 vertices on the outside, and you apply a subdivision surface modifier to that, and it creates 4 more vertices in there. So it splits that polygon up, and it creates more resolution that isn't part of the scene. So it's kind of a memory optimization thing that looks very swish once you apply it. Usually objects have that applied, but some objects don't. In Biscuits' hair, for example, hasn't got that applied. So just one of those things. I thought I'd mention that while I'm talking about it. Right, let's have a look what this currently looks like in the Iray preview here. I believe we still have the camera's headlamp switched on here. This is camera 1. So with camera 1 selected under cameras, let's switch that off so that we get an accurate representation of what this currently looks like. Have we switched? Oh yeah, and of course, yeah, it's switched over to Iray. My computer is still thinking about it. And thank you for the link to Patreon, Julia. I much appreciate that.
Wings King K thought it was useful about keeping the character in place.
Right, okay. I'm glad it was helpful. Excellent. Oh, there we go. We can see the preview springing into action. It's still very, very low. I'm just scrolling through the chat here, guys. Yes, it's all those little tips. I thought this is why these live streams are kind of nice. Often I would cut these things out if rendering takes too long. But you know, if you do have any questions about a technique I've used or anything that where you thought, well, isn't there a better way of doing X, Y, and Z? Please let me know. This is what the chat's for. Chip in, and you know, maybe we can I can help you. If I know the solution, I will tell you. If it's too elaborate, I'll make it. I'll make a separate video about it. So right now we can see the pool looks okay, the background looks okay. All we don't really have is a lot of kind of base lighting, so it looks all very very dark, doesn't it? So let's see if we can improve that somehow. So one way of doing that, and I'm just looking at this tiny little preview over there. Maybe I can bring that out a little bit more. There we go. So one thing I'm thinking is that we could put one dedicated spotlight on the character. I think I'm also going to move the character over to the right a little bit more. Let's start there actually. Switch over to the tab here and go to this again. So with Monique selected, oh, that's another thing I can show you. This is something many people don't know that. So here's the situation. I'm looking at camera 1 here, and I like to move the character along, literally along the pool line. So here's what I'd like to do. Oops, computer is struggling to keep up here. There we go. So what I like to do is move the character along, literally to the side, like from here, just shift it over to there. There we go, from here to there, just a little bit. But you can see that my direct manipulation gadget doesn't seem to allow me to do that. Right now, it allows me to position the character slightly further forward or further forward in this way. So either this way or that way. And it doesn't seem to allow me to move it left or right exactly. And that other programs call it different things. And this is kind of, it depends what this manipulator gadget is currently looking at. And this can be changed under a tab called the tool settings. So with this thing selected, with direct manipulation gadget selected, you can go over to tool settings, and there's this thing that's called use local coordinates. So right now, because we've spun the character around and twisted her around a little bit, she is now no longer lined up to the world axis, and the world axis is probably still lined up for left-right movement. So we can change that. Switch that to here so you can see it better. We can change the use local coordinates to use world coordinates, and as soon as I do that, then I see that the gadget is now lined up the way I would expect it to. So if ever you see the thing being lined up in a way that you hadn't quite expected and you'd like for it to change, then that's a way to look at. There's the tool settings tab. You can open that under window and then panes, tabs, and there's the tool settings are hiding in here somewhere, and that'll bring that up. You can dock that palette, and it's context sensitive, so depending on which tool you choose from your palette, this thing is context sensitive and may bring up other options there. So right now use world coordinates works well, local coordinates doesn't work so well. So there we go, another gadget I thought I'd let you have there on the way. So let's move the character further over here. I think if she sits closer to there and also kind of more center in the picture, I think I'd like that. Now one way to brighten up the scene is of course to play with the headlamp setting. So we don't have to completely switch it off. We can just play with the intensity of the headlamps. Sometimes it works quite well if all we need is a little bit of brightening up there. Let me see if I can change the intensity there once my computer is responsive again. I guess, you know, streaming, encoding, and doing DAZ rendering at the same time. This is all just, it's not easy, is it? Speaking of which, perhaps I should save the scene just in case the inevitable happens and, you know, my computer crashes. Can you imagine we'd have to start all the way from scratch? That wouldn't be good, would it? So as soon as it comes back to life, I might just quickly hit that save button there always good. Always good to save while you're working, and also good to save before you start rendering. That's another tip I can give you there. So right now it looks like my computer isn't doing anything. Come on, save as, save the whole scene, and I'll say call this the pool stream. There we go, not the poll stream, the pool stream. There. Whew. Crisis averted. So to adjust the intensity of the headlamp, currently it's I think it's by default it's set to 100%, but you can adjust it. You can adjust it to have a lower intensity. You can adjust the offset of that, but only that to the camera. So luckily I have that both on my director's camera as well as on the real camera that we're rendering with. And I'll show you as soon as my computer stopped messing around here. I'll show you exactly how that works. This afternoon, by the way, I'm going to do another video to introduce, to show you how to do artificial depth of field. So we could add depth of field in here in the scene as well by switching that under the camera setting there. Let me just first of all switch the Iray mode off here so that we go and see this just use much less resources here, make my computer a bit more responsive. So on my camera here, say if I select camera 1 and I go into my camera setting, or on the parameters tab, it doesn't make a difference. There is a way that under camera I can introduce something field right here. Let me just switch over there. Whoa. Yeah, I think my computer doesn't really like me doing so many things at the same time. Forgive me, hardware, forgive me. So here we go. This is this, you can't even see that now, can you? What a shame. So anyway, you can switch the depth of field on, and I've shown you in previous videos of how to deal with that. But doing so introduces yet another element of calculation into the whole mixer. It'll be even more taxing on the hardware. So sometimes you can introduce depth of field effects in Photoshop, and that's thanks to the excellent blur gallery. One of my Patreon supporters, Christina McKay, hello Christina, if you're watching, hello to Germany again. You can introduce that in Photoshop. So my plan is to make another video on that and show you maybe using this image how you can effectively do that to save some rendering time. A very, very interesting tip. So right now we're just going to go and head back over to the headlamp feature where it's currently off. Let's switch that on again and see if we can just brighten up the scene a little bit. So right now we have the headlamp intensity set to 1. If we turn that down, we can be very subtle about this, or we can we it up, and then the picture looks really, really scary. So perhaps by switching over to that camera here. This is just the OpenGL preview that never really looks nice. So the one that we would currently look at here is the number 1 preview. Let's see, that's probably a little bit too intense. It's a shame that we have to switch Iray on again and look at it, because otherwise we're never going to get an accurate preview of that. So yes. So headlamp, that's one thing that you can just tweak the intensity down. You can also adjust the offset here, X, Y, and Z offset. So that means by default 0 means the headlamp emanates directly from where the camera is. So always where you're looking. So you look elsewhere with the camera and the light always shines at the object from the direction of the camera. So it's kind of comparable to these lighting hats that the miners wear, so that they can see what they're mining and chipping away at. Car mechanics use it as well, and in DAZ Studio it's kind of used so that we get to see something. But so sometimes it's over the top. Sometimes we just want that effect a little bit, and that's something you can employ here. As soon as my computer springs back to action, we can see what the headlamp intensity looks like when we turn it down. Yeah, it's one of those things. But the offset here, the X, Y, and Z offset, you can, if you imagine this is the camera and this is the headlamp here, then you can literally go and take this and move it X, Y, and Z. So if you want that to come from a different direction, you can make that happen. I think the only thing you can't do is turn it. So it would be really helpful if we had a way to not only move the camera, the headlamp off the camera, but also then turn it around, like the rotation in that headlamp. That'd be kind of cool. But hey, one of those things. So this is already with the headlamp applied here. It doesn't look too bad. All I don't really like is this this kind of strip of light here. I don't really like that, and that's because it just comes from this very direction. So I suppose if we were to move this up a little bit, then we can maybe see, say try 5, then the headlamp moves up, so it kind of shines from slightly further up. I don't know if that's making a major difference here. I think the only thing I would suggest to make this image better is to create a light from the hotel image on the other side, or use maybe even a distant light to do that. And then one final thing, I think, to finish the scene off is to place a spotlight on the character from somewhere like here, and then just have some soft shadows just illuminate her there. Yeah, those are values you can play around with. I'm not a big fan of the headlamp kind of look. I much prefer the like mesh lights or parametric lights there. So I suppose let's just leave it for now, because I'm really running out of time. I wanted to show you one last thing, and that is to place a nice looking light on the character, so that the character is a little bit more illumination there. So I'll leave the headlamp feature in place here for now, and let you fiddle with that and see if you can come up with a better way of doing it. Let's go back to smooth shaded here. If you have any pictures that you want to share with me, then head over to my Facebook page, by the way. You can do that. That lets you post pictures. You can either post a link to your own gallery, like Renderosity Gallery or something, or if I'm thinking, especially if you've used exactly this setting and used my tips, I'd love to just see what you guys have come up with. And Facebook allows you to kind of directly upload the picture there. So, then we can all share and all chip in and, give each other critique and see if we can improve each other's work. That'd be really nice. So it's facebook.com/wpguru.tv. And Julia's going to post a link there in a minute, if she can find the page. So let's put a light on the character here. Let's go back to my director's camera so I can mess around with that. My light, I'm envisioning my light to come from somewhere from here into the scene. So the way I'm going to do that is to create a new spotlight in this case, and I'm going to go and apply the director's camera thing so that it kind of shines. It's being created directly from where I'm looking, and that's kind of that'll help me out. And here's the light. Whoops. Here's the light, and here's how it's shining onto the character. So I think one thing I'd like to do is move the light forward a little bit. You can also use the point at feature. That's another thing that's sometimes helpful. Under parameters, with the spotlight in the scene selected here, spotlight selected, if you go over to MISC, then you can have this point at option, and if you do that, you can point the light directly at the character, or literally at anything. So you can point it at Monique, but you can also be more kind of narrowed down. You can point it at her head, for example, rather than just at her kind of bounding box. You can point it at her head. Let's see if we can do that. Head's kind of buried in here somewhere. There's the head. And when you do that, I'll show you what the exciting bit about this is. If you do that, then you can move the light around, and in so doing, oops, that was obviously the wrong button that I've pressed there, the wrong thing I've said there. If I move the light forward now, you can see that the actual light points always at the character. So that's kind of a very neat trick. If you already know what you want to illuminate and where from, it's just one less step to worry about. Point the light at the character, or at an attribute of the character and then, you know, move it either further away, closer in, whatnot, whatever you want to do. The light's always going to point at the character. So that's fairly cool.
Asala has a question.
Oh, Athala, PC specifications is a good point. I've literally had I've literally wrote an article a couple of days ago. I haven't posted that yet, but I will. Wouldn't that be nice if I could just do that now? Actually, let me do that. This is live interaction for you. This is awesome. I've got. I just need to log into my website and literally hit publish, and then I can give you the link. How cool is that? So yes, I get this question. I get asked this question every once in a while, and I thought it'd be a good idea to post this. And it's a post that's called My Rig, and in essence, it's a relatively cheap computer that I've bought in 2016, and it's an old HP workstation, and it's called an HP Z600 workstation. And so I will update this post going forward. So this is here. This is for you, Athala. This should be live now. See if you can check it out. So it's a HP Z600 workstation. This is a dual Xeon workstation, and it's something. Thank you. And it's something I got from eBay for $170, and it's something that used to cost about $6,000 because it has 2 quad-core Intel CPUs and they're very fast. It gives me up to 16 threads of rendering capacity under software renderers like either 3Delight or Carrara, so they're really, really powerful. And I've added a few bits to it, so like an SSD drive and GeForce GTX 970, also in 2016. It has about 1664 CUDA cores, and that gives fairly good Iray rendering capacities. So it's also one of those things that it's been superseded. I don't think they make it anymore. It was about $200, so it wasn't actually that bad. I suppose the 10 series kind of superseded that. So the 1080, now we've got the 2080 and the 2040 Ti, I believe they're called, and they've kind of replaced that series. But they were out at the time when I bought mine, but it just didn't fit into the case. So there we go. HP Z600 workstation. So there we go. With the light in place here, let's change a few parameters on that. So with the spotlight selected under light here, we can whittle these things down into area and photometrics. And I've talked about this many times before. We have the light geometry. Let me change over to that here. So I wish my shortcut keys were working without interfering with DAZ Studio. I'm sure next week they will. So the light geometry is currently set to point light. That's by default. The spotlight comes in as a point light. But I don't think that gives very good results. So I like to change that over to a rectangle. And then that's kind of emulates a photographer's softbox. And what we've got here then is the height and width parameters, which are set to 10 by default. That'll work, but it'll give kind of medium soft shadows. So they're not harsh shadows like you get with the distant light, for example. The distant parametric light in Iray is terrible. It gives very harsh shadows, very unnatural. It's almost like on a very, very strong sunny day. And 10 is kind of a little bit softer, but I would recommend you try something like 50 or 100. So let me try 50, because otherwise you see this kind of light cone shining on the character, and I don't really want that. I want this to be like a fairly soft just illumination of where the action is in that picture. So change that to 50. Under photometrics, you've got these two values. The temperature is the color temperature. 6500 is about daylight temperature. So I like to tone that down into 4000 or 5000. It's kind of an indoor evening scene. Let's try 4000. That makes it a bit more orangey yellow, and anything more than 6500 will make it kind of bluer. That's kind of how the color temperatures work. In degrees Kelvin measured they are, and I believe this comes from heating up a pitch black thing which doesn't illuminate any light, which is then 0 degrees Kelvin technically. And the hotter you make that black body, the more it starts to glow, and it starts to kind of glimmer at like a dark red, and then it goes orange, and then at some point it's white, and then if you heat it up even more, it apparently goes blue. I don't have black bodies to test that theory with, but that's what I remember our physics teacher told us at school back in the day. It's many years ago. And luminous flux is the intensity of the light, and to make that work in this situation, it's kind of depends on how far the light is away from the character. I think maybe let's try 20,000 and see where that gets us. So that's just something I'm pulling out of my hat here, and I'll see if it works. Let's switch this main scene over to Iray and see if those are results we can live with, and if not, we're just gonna go and tweak the parameters of the light, and then that should be the last thing we're gonna do. I know you guys are all busy and you want to go home, and I've been talking for nearly 2 hours. This was kind of the longest live stream ever. One of those things. But hey, if it was helpful to y'all, then I'm more than happy to do it. And it's also a nice opportunity to hang and get to know you, and you can ask questions, and it's one of those things.
Don't forget widescreen.
Oh, am I not widescreen? Oh, there we go. See, this is why you really need assistance. This is what would I do without my wonderful wife, Julia Lewis? Woo! It's still not there, is it? Well, I've just switched it over. Maybe it's my computer literally lagging behind here. That could be. Are we still? No, we're not, are we? We should. We're coming up to it in a moment. I think maybe there's a bit of a stream delay going there with all the rendering I'm doing. Could also be due to the length of the screencast. It kind of it takes just so much longer for anything to happen. That could be. Haha! See, I do it, and 30 seconds later it happens in real life. It wasn't like that last week. Last week we were literally snappy, probably. So my computer, speaking of my computer, is still behind. It's just only now kicking in here with a picture we can look at, and it looks like we're kind of getting there. I think the character could do with a bit more light, even. So I think 20,000 was probably not quite enough. Let's crank that value up to about 100,000. So that's how much you need there. The good thing is once Iray's done the first render, I call that a cold render. If you're switching over to the Iray viewport for the first time, that's kind of a cold render, and it takes a bit longer to do anything. And of course, it doesn't help that I'm encoding a 1080p 30 stream at the same time and capturing a webcam and letting a poor computer do all that, and most of it is done by the graphics card. So there we go. It's it usually goes a little bit faster when I'm working on my own or when I'm making screencasts pre-recorded. So yes, all that is happening in the background. I guess that's just makes my computer a little bit slower there. So okay, we're getting there. The longer this renders, the more light comes into the scene. Also important to remember. So sometimes you think, oh, the light's not intense enough, and then you walk away and grab a coffee, and then you see the light's actually, just as intense as you wanted it to be. But as I said before, this is partly due to the fact that we have so many light sources in our picture. That's what makes this so slow. So if what I could have done here is switch all these lights off in the background, or just invisibilize them, just focus on what the character is going to look like in situ, and then just take it from there. Or I could do what I do in the controls and say, well, yeah, while my computer is rendering, here's something we've prepared earlier, and this is actually what it looks like. And of course, it took about 2 hours to render this picture. So don't give yourself or your computer a hard time if it doesn't immediately look like that. But you can kind of see the all these elements that we've put in here. The only other thing that I've added here in this picture is a little bit of artificial depth of field. So I don't know if you can see that in the stream, but this is also on my gallery on Renderosity. You can have a closer look at that, or it's in the YouTube community tab as well. That's kind of a larger version of that, if you like. And I think I've also posted it on the Facebook page, so you can have a look at that. So you see the foreground here which is also covered by my picture, which doesn't help. And the top here, there's a bit of depth of field effect going on here, and that's done with the Photoshop blur gallery. So I'm going to prepare a video for you in order to show you how that works. You can do that in DAZ Studio, but again, it adds another layer of complexity there. So yeah, that's what my final result kind of looks like, and our result is kind of getting there, So I'm still getting a bit of a harshish shadow down here, so I think what I may want to do there is to increase the intensity of the Sydney Harbour, which we can see in the background here. That's something we can see. Maybe I can even do that here. On the plane, on the emissions tab, on the surfaces, we can crank that right up. So instead of 2000, let's use 10,000. So if I do that, then this reflection here will be lighter, and we will also probably going to get more light from here in there. So that's one thing I can do. And the other thing is I can make the shadows a little bit softer on the character, and I can also go ahead and make the light intensity maybe a little bit better, move the light around. It's something to try out, and and eventually, hopefully, you're going to come up with a picture like this. There we go. That's all I wanted to show you today. You're very welcome. You're very welcome. That's the community tab there. Absolutely, you can get in touch with me there. Sometimes I'm also letting you know of upcoming live streams, of course, there, and anything like gaming or other stuff. Gaming is something I want to get into, not as a professional gamer, but more from a point of view of having a look at how game developers may have made images there, made the scene, and talk about textures and talk about geometry and talk about game engines, and also it's a nice place to hang out and ask questions. That's really all I wanted to tell you today. Thank you so much for watching from all over the world. We have had international viewers. I really appreciate that. I'm gonna continue doing these either as a scene building exercise or any kind of other DAZ Studio tips. Fridays at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, another nice tip from Julia. She told me that I've given out the wrong times for Europe and the UK. Of course, that's terrible of me. So 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time is currently, while we're in winter time, is, I believe, what was it again, 3 p.m. in the UK and 4 p.m. in Europe. Is that correct? Because I thought it was an hour later, so I think it's got to be, so it's 3 p.m. in the UK every Friday and 4 p.m. in Europe, in most parts of Europe, and it's 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And don't ask me what that is in Pacific time. I really have no idea. Anyway, that was it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Your donations on Patreon are greatly appreciated. Hang around for more funky videos about DAZ Studio, creative software, kind of little gadgety reviews, how I do this whole streaming thing and whatnot. Any questions, drop them down in the comments. I will see you very soon. Let me roll the credits somewhere. Here, there we go. Take care. Bye-bye.